In 2019, I noticed that UNESCO had launched an initiative to have a year of Indigenous languages. In fact, this year in 2019 was to incorporate Indigenous, endangered and vulnerable languages the world over. So what does that mean to me as someone from the UK? Someone who speaks English as a first language and has all the privileges of being able to travel the world and use my English and communicate with lots of different people who want to learn my language, a language that's been exported, even a language that's been made to be spoken by the people of the colonies and of the territories where the English have gone. And now, newly even, people from those territories take the language as well and teach it and use it and expect other people to speak it. So why on earth would these Indigenous languages and this year of Indigenous languages, even as somebody who likes learning languages, why would this matter to me? Well, the truth is that for me, I'm also Welsh, and what happened to the Welsh language and how our family was affected by a change in family language from Welsh to English. And I'm not talking hundreds and hundreds of years ago, I'm talking recent generations, where words of Welsh remained in English. For me, the idea of indigeneity, the idea of vulnerable and endangered languages really struck a chord because this was my reality in my own family. When you hear the word Indigenous, people often think of, people far away, people with dark skin, people living non-modern lives. There are very strange and weird and erroneous judgments that we make when we talk about these communities and these languages. And so in 2019, I knew that I was organizing the Polyglot conference, and the destination was Japan. And Japan itself has an indigenous language that's severely threatened, Ainu, which is in the north of Japan. And I knew that it was an opportunity to give a platform to people who could talk on the topic of Indigenous, endangered and vulnerable languages. And so the conference became officially part of the umbrella of that year, 2019, of Indigenous languages. And I was very, very happy that I could offer this platform for this special event in an official capacity as well. But when I was in Japan, I was talking to stakeholders and I was offered the opportunity to go with one of the local partners to Melbourne to attend a conference about conference organizing, of all things. And there were two people in our community, Olivia and Liz, who were based in that part of the world. And I had this idea that maybe we could do a smaller event in Melbourne that would be a fun thing to add on. I'm a great believer in trying to get the most out of opportunities. And so traveling to a place like Melbourne was so far away from me. And I thought, well, it would be a shame to just go for this one thing and not do something about the Indigenous languages of that part of the world too. I knew it was unlikely that many people would come to talk on the topic in Fukuoka, especially given that we'd had somebody from that part of the world come to Greece in a previous edition of the conference. So for me, this was an ideal opportunity to celebrate languages, but also to see if we could add that element of Indigenous, endangered, vulnerable languages to an event there. And so Gilad Zuckerman kindly accepted to join and to talk about the many hundreds of Indigenous languages in Australia. He talked about his work of going and reawakening sleeping beauties, languages that had been driven to extinction. No more speakers left because of decades, maybe centuries of putting those communities in a place where they were unable to use their languages. They were taken from them because of forced adoptions, because of colonization, because of English ruling the waves, rule Britannia. But that wasn't a great sentiment for the poor people who were left to scramble and to struggle to reassert their identities in later decades and to this day. And one of the things that Gilad Zuckerman does is he helps to reconnect these communities to the languages that they've lost, the languages that were the vehicle of their cultures as well, even though they do retain their own individualities, their own cultures, their own specific traditions. Language is a really important thing to lose, and something I recognized in my own family, and it's something I could empathize with. And so hearing and talking about his work, going to communities to reconstruct languages and then teach them back to those communities was really quite the thing. And so when we went to Fukuoka, for me it was important that we carried this idea of raising awareness, talking about the communities, talking about the peoples. And look, there are so many of these different types of communities around the world. It's not just one area, it's all over the world, where these stories ring through the ears of the people, where they tell of stories from their own communities of what was, what used to be, and what now no longer is, or what we're fighting to conserve and preserve and to engender a feeling of positivity about their identity, about their place alongside other identities in countries that are unrecognizable to what they were when these languages were thriving. And so when we got together in Fukuoka, there were people that came from Indonesia. There were people that came from the US. And in fact, this is Jonty, who had a very similar story to my own with Welsh, with his Circassian language, that he had to reclaim it. And then he delivered a workshop on the language itself. And you can find these on the YouTube channel for the Polyglot Conference. But it's important to show the different faces of these people that are working towards a meaningful way forwards for these communities all over the globe. In fact, Mike Campbell from Glossika brought some Indigenous friends over from Taiwan. The island has so many wonderful linguistically diverse communities, and you can visit the villages and you can meet with the people. And we were very, very fortunate to get some of these people come over to Polyglot Conference in Fukuoka and went on stage to talk about the language, to raise awareness, but to also go a little bit beyond that and have a stand with QR codes and information and books, and to be able to ask questions and to interact with people. Because after all, often this idea of Indigenous, endangered and vulnerable, when it comes to languages and linguistic communities, we as outsiders to the different communities, often we'll come with our own ideas and our own thoughts as to what that means and what it should mean, and our interpretations and our ideas and our desires and our will and our thoughts on how that should make sense. But actually, what we need to do is interact with the people for whom this is reality, because their stories are all different. Even within one community, the stories of individuals are different. And pretending that we can group everyone together in just one kind of gooey mess of our own interpretation of what that should mean is naive at best, ignorant at worst, willingly ignorant at worst, should I say. But there are opportunities to ask open questions of people, to interact on a level where we talk and find out and understand, and try and leave our own ideas and prejudices and stories at the door and walk in with an open heart, and to engage in a way that allows us to really internalize the meaning and the power of these communities, their cultures and languages, and to understand what's important to them and leave to one side for one moment what's important to us. Because they need to be centered in these discussions, these dialogues, these presentations. Not me, not you. They do. The people we're talking about need to be the center of the discussion. They need to be the ones that talk about it. In a world where my language has so much privilege and weight and is spoken now by so many countries, that kind of privilege is not afforded to these communities in the same way. And so there's always an inequality that is very difficult to perceive if you don't belong to that group. And so I decided that, having been to Japan and having celebrated these languages from other parts of the world, that my attention really should turn to my own home islands, the islands I grew up on. My birth island of Great Britain, as well as the island of Ireland, and also the other islands around those two bigger islands, including the Isle of Man, and places where languages had also lost currency in favor of English because of a dominant culture that dominated over, and a linguistic community that felt threatened. And still to this day, English speakers from the UK and the US and places have this fear of, what are they saying? And so you have a tendency, or see a tendency within these communities, to try to wash over these cultures. And so to go and back and to go to these islands knowing the history and how things have played out over the centuries, it was an opportunity to celebrate the languages of the Isles, including English. Not just English's sister language, Scots, its closest living language, but also the Celtic languages, Welsh, Cornish, Irish, Gaelic, and Manx. They're the languages of our Isles. And then there are new languages that have arrived to our shores as well, which also deserve to be celebrated. But these languages, the Celtic languages in particular, are seen as our Indigenous languages. Scots has a vulnerability to it, for many reasons too, and it's also important to not negate that, and to make sure that we give a voice in as many areas as possible to all of these languages. When I was in Fukuoka as well, I met Alec, who is a Maori speaker. And having organised an event in Melbourne, I knew how people were very open to the idea of coming together and breaking bread and talking about languages and talking about learning languages. And I thought it would be a great thing to go back. And the plan was to go back to Australia and New Zealand, Aotearoa, in 2020, and to celebrate the languages of that region once again. And I wanted to do something more meaningful. Reconnecting in Edinburgh with people from my islands made me realise actually I want to connect on a deeper level with these languages. And so I agreed with that, Alec, that we would meet online and we would learn Maori. He would teach me and I would learn the language before going to to Aotearoa. And that was the plan. And for me, that was a commitment, obviously, to take on board, to learn a language. But you know, going to a region and having this linguistic appreciation for the communities, for the linguistic diversity, learning the language can be something quite special to do. And so I was committed and I wanted to do that. We also had plans to go to Cholula in Mexico to get involved with Nahuatl. The idea would be to have in 2020 a wonderful opportunity for people to come and to learn some Nahuatl, to have some projects to help with people who want to learn the language, and I was keen to learn some of the language myself as well. We had Oz on board, who works at Zaloa Languages, and people could do the Go Nahuatl course on the Zaloa website for free, and it's a donation-based course that you can still do to this day. And the idea was Oz would also take people through their paces and in person deliver a course to really give a meaningful start to anybody's interest in the Nahuatl language. But then, of course, in that year, in 2020, Europe started to close down slowly but surely. In fact, my daughter's school closed down the week I arrived back from the language event in Edinburgh, celebrating the languages of the Isles. And the world changed. We had to stop. We had to pause. We had to take a breath and rethink, reevaluate, reimagine what the world would be. It was difficult. It was challenging in so many ways. The plans that we had slowly fell into an abyss that we didn't even know would have an ending. And so my flights and accommodation, plans for Australia and New Zealand for 2020 just melted away before my eyes. And I was sad for that reason, and I kind of had to wait like everyone else to see what that meant. What that meant for this plan about a year of 2019 that I wanted to take into 2020 and hopefully beyond. 1 year, after all, isn't a long time to celebrate these languages and to do something meaningful. 1 year is a drop in a vast ocean. To undo centuries of history, of oppression, of people not being able to kind of have their voices heard. And so it felt like it had been a bit of a cheat, really, to have this taken away. But very quickly, things started to appear out of the chaos that was the pandemic. And the very first course that I noticed come online was a course in Northern Sami. And immediately I signed up for this course. It was an opportunity to go through a course book that a teacher of Northern Sami was writing and to try it out. And so I and a number of other people in the community came online and started working on Northern Sami. And indeed, at a similar time, there was a course for Kristang, which was a language spoken in Malaysia and Singapore. And it was described as a creolized language, which has many elements of Portuguese and Malay and other languages to make a beautiful, unique linguistic community too. Also an endangered language. But for me, doing these language courses of Northern Sami and Kristang was an opportunity to explore other communities, to hear other voices, and speaking to Alec as well about Maori, the discussions and the ideas and the histories and all of this sort of started to really make me realize in a very deep, meaningful way that every story is different, every community is different. The openness, the willingness, the desire for people to come in and to work on these languages and to bring their own thought processes and their own ideas and their own ideals made me realize very quickly, actually, that depending on the community, there was a different reaction to this, and that the dialogue needed to be an open one with the communities involved. Soon after the courses for Northern Sami and Kristang had finished, a course for Scots, the sister language of English, opened up with the University of Edinburgh, and I was absolutely thrilled by the idea of being able to not just revisit the language that I had heard about during the language event, but to actually work with one of the speakers that was there through the University of Edinburgh to do a course for 3 weeks intensively on the language. And I thoroughly enjoyed doing it. Similar things happened for Cornish, where Cornish, Irish, and also Gaelic came online as courses that I could follow for an academic year. And that got me to thinking, these languages are not Pokemon. We don't go to collect them all. They're not things that we just collect like they're cards that we stack away in a bag and we get them out every now and again and look at them and remember that we can say hello. And this is kind of our polyglot syndrome, right? This is our language collector syndrome, the shiny object, the new object, the interesting object, the new thing in the room, the thing that we think that we can just do and go around doing it, add it to a badge, add it to a letter or a number or whatever it is that we add to our ever-growing list of languages that continues to grow and never shrinks. That we go and we talk to a newspaper, we talk to a blog post, we talk to a podcast interviewer, we talk to somebody researching language, we talk to our friends, our families, talk to people in our community, we talk online, we're talking on forums, in Zoom rooms. We're all excited and we have the best will in the world and the best meaning for this in the world. The consciousness about what we're doing is the key. Consciousness that whilst there's nothing inherently wrong with learning any language necessarily, it's the consciousness and the awareness of why we're doing it, where these things have come from, where the languages have come from, the cultures they're attached to, the people and the communities they're attached to. What do these things mean to them? Because for them, they're not Pokemon cards that they get out of their bag and collect and look at and wonder over just every now and again when it's raining outside and we can't enjoy the sun, or go running around in the park, or go out with friends. That Pokemon card is, for them, an identity that's branded on them. And that has a lot of meaning. They may see that as a branding. They may see it as a tattoo that they wear with pride. They may see it as a transfer that they can wash off at will and mix into the background of other cultures and identities. They may see it as a pain, an aching pain, a longing. And so, whilst I have personally nothing against people learning and wanting to learn, I think that this needs to be a discussion with the communities of these languages, of how we treat them. If we're creating materials, how we create them, how we help them, how we center them. Is this okay? Can we possibly begin to understand what this means to that community? The only way to do that is to make sure that they are also on board with what we're doing and when we're doing it. And so learning one of these languages, unlike learning French or Spanish, Portuguese, or English, or you can name other languages too, potentially. These are all languages that have been exported and been imposed, and they're colonial languages that, as far as I'm concerned, no longer belong to one culture or country or identity. They belong to multiple cultures, multiple countries, and multiple identities. These languages, the endangered, vulnerable, indigenous languages, very often belong to quite local communities that are localized in one area or even within part of one area. And so learning them is really something we have to take a lot more seriously in terms of the cultural impact, what it means to learn them, what it means to speak them. Very often these languages don't have the standardized form that we're used to in books. So English has a standardized form of the language. That brings its own issues when it comes to other variations of English. People looking down, we can perhaps even understand to a degree if you speak a variation of a language that's been standardized, that is frowned upon or looked down upon or seen as uneducated. It helps give you maybe a small window into the world of some of these languages and communities, or at least gives you something where you can use as a point of reference, a point of empathy. But we don't have the materials in the same way necessarily for these languages, and so learning them is not the same. The Pokemon cards are no longer valid. Collecting them and putting them in your backpack is not really the done thing. And pretending it is also naive. And so I was very pleased when the decade of Indigenous languages was announced, that this would be something that would go from 2022 for another 10 years. In fact, if I'm very honest, I don't think it's enough either. I was very pleased. I also still don't think it's enough. This is going to be something that we need to work on for definitely my lifetime and beyond. And I'm hoping that I'm going to be around for more than 10 years. So I think it's going to be something that's going to be necessary to talk about and revisit many, many times over. And I know a lot of the presentations at the moment, the kind of the cool talking point is ChatGPT and AI technology. I just want to let you stop and reflect for one moment on one very important thing that I've noticed. This technology relies on a corpus of texts and knowledge of a language. So for languages like English and Spanish and Italian and Chinese, and these languages that are privileged language communities in many, many ways, the things that are created, the texts that are created using a lot of material. And so they can do a good job as AI machines, and the technology can do a good job in recreating what would seem authentic material. This is not true of our Indigenous, endangered, and vulnerable languages. The corpus, the materials is not there. So we have to be very careful. We still don't have Wikipedia pages in many of these languages. And I would encourage you, if you are interested in these languages and you want to help, that would be one avenue to look at with communities if you're interested in learning, to help to create meaningful content, to enable platforms and opportunities for speakers to get the materials out there, so that when the AI time comes for these languages, that we're not faced with a lot of garbled rubbish that makes no sense and is then given to other people, exposed and put on the internet, and drowns out the true Indigenous, endangered, and vulnerable language group community voices with AI nonsense. It needs to be authentic. We need to give it the chance to have the opportunities that the other privileged languages of this world get from this technology. So this needs to be done in a very sensitive way. And if you're in tech and you are listening to this and wondering how you can help, I think a stop in the system from AI drawing on AI materials is a very good way to go about doing this, so that we make sure that we're only drawing on authentic materials in the future. As I say, this is going to be a lot of work in process and not just a decade. Finally, I just want to kind of end on a slightly more optimistic note. In Mexico, we did get together eventually last year. A lot of things have been going on, and I want to just acknowledge that what's been going on in Ukraine and what's been going on since COVID for many people is a reality of fewer opportunities to access events, travel, jobs, money. Things have got more expensive for so many of us around the world. And I was very glad that we could at least have an event in Mexico, that we could celebrate Nahuatl, and that we could have a group of people to come over to study the language for a week, and that we could use donations for the conference to pay for translations of other things into Nahuatl, and that we could offer an extended class beyond the Polyglot conference physical classes in Mexico on the online Polyglot conference live environment for 3 months with Oz to continue the study of the language. And those videos are available to anyone in the environment and will be released eventually as well. I'm also really pleased to say that 2022 has been the year that we've started to release the link stories in 3 languages that are not on link, with the blessing and the green light from Steve Kaufman and the people at Link. Stories.polyglotconference.com is open and available, and you can read all 60 stories and hear them in Ladino already. And we have some of the Nahuatl stories released, and also one of the Sorani Kurdish stories released. And I hope you'll enjoy them. And if we can add to this, I'm very happy to add to it. If it can go onto the Link site, all so much the better, because they have a wider audience. And my ideal would be to one day have these housed on the Link site itself. For now, I want them to be available and open to anyone who's interested in learning them. And I hope that we can add more. And I'm also going to be in Edinburgh again on the 22nd and 23rd of April to celebrate more languages with more of you in person. We've got a great little auditorium at the French Institute. We're going to spend the whole weekend together. Tickets are still available if you want to come and you're hearing this now before the event. Just thelanguageevent.com is where you need to go, and you can get a ticket. The money goes towards paying for the venue and the filming, so that we can have videos of the important information that's shared, and also to other endeavors like translations of stories, like paying for extra classes for people, like supporting these Indigenous, endangered and vulnerable language communities in a way that means something to them and allows their voices to be heard on a platform that was otherwise not there for them to use. And the same goes for the Polyglot conference. Whenever we have an event, and if you feel that your voice needs to be heard and you'd like the use of the platform, I would absolutely love to welcome you with a very open heart and to talk to you about what's important to you and your community. Because what you want is what I want. and that's what counts. Thank you. Okay, I see a question from Timothy Douglas. Could you clarify what you mean when you say that a language belongs to someone and doesn't belong to anyone? So a language like English, for example, no longer belongs to one group, is what I meant, because it's a language that was exported and imposed on many people around the world. And so it now belongs to everyone, really, and not anyone in particular. It's our own idiolects belong to us, our own variations of the language belong to our communities, and so in a way it still belongs to communities, depending. But English is a standardized language, or standardized Englishes even, because there's not just one version of a standardized English, there are many. They belong to the people that use them, no matter where they're from, no matter anything. And it's a different way than languages that have been on the other side of history. My personal journey with this and my revelation from these years of exploring Indigenous, endangered and vulnerable languages and doing the projects and kind of the thought process behind this presentation as well, it's kind of my own learnings, is that I recognize that what I did when I did the projects of learning some Northern Sami, learning some Kristang, learning some Scots, they were all, and learning some Maori, learning some of the languages was a great journey for me to go on. But they were short trips. And I felt the urge to recognize them as such, and to recognize that whilst they did mean something to me, that I can understand that some people would actually not appreciate that kind of attitude towards those languages in particular. And there's a Gaelic and an Irish phrase, a saying, that goes something like this. Kind of better to have Gaelic or Irish on the lips than in the grave. And it's sometimes perceived as learners learning a little bit of the language to kind of feel that they've ticked a box to say that they've done their bit. And to a degree, I understand that, but also to some speakers, it's sometimes perceived as an excuse not to learn more. And so it can be perceived in different ways in different communities and by different communities. And so some of the languages that I've been learning since the pandemic, one of them is Cornish, and I'm now preparing for my 3rd grade exam in Cornish. There are 4 grades. I don't know how much you're all aware of this, and I spoke about Cornish last time, but last gathering I sat the grade 2 exam and passed it, and then carried on to grade 3. For grade 4, I need to start looking and reading the old texts of Cornish and working with some of the modern texts too. And my goal is to do all of that. And this will take me another 2 years. This will be, in the end, 5 years of study of Cornish. And I will continue with the language and with the community and start being an active member to write things in Cornish as well, I hope. And so making a decision like that for a longer period of time is a commitment, but also I think one that's worth making. And so I would encourage everyone to learn more about languages, and doing the projects like I've done them is definitely better than not doing anything. I would also encourage you, if you have the time, the inclination, the willingness, to commit to one of these language communities as well, and to see it through on a longer term basis. Okay. Let me see. I think there's a question here. Okay, from Ming Liu. Okay, will there be any spotlights in the Polyglot Conference 2023, which will be the first time held in Southeast Asia? So for the conference, I'm not quite sure what you mean by spotlights. There are always, we always cover the regional languages and cultures, so that's always important to me. It's one of the themes of the conference every year, and so in that respect, yes, and I guess that's what you mean. So yes, anywhere the conference goes will have a sort of a spotlight on that. It's one of the themes. Will there be a link to the where's the link to the Polyglot stories? So you can find it two ways. You can go to polyglotconference.com, and then on the very top you'll see stories written, and the direct link is stories.polyglotconference.com. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so Timothy says, okay, clarification of the first question. To be more precise, what do you mean by belong? I would contend that languages are not property or patience. I think you're entitled to disagree, Timothy, and I will accept that you disagree. I disagree with you. I think that they do often belong, especially in the context of Indigenous, endangered, and vulnerable languages. I've heard from many people that they feel that there's a belonging of a language to a community, and that there are certainly some Indigenous communities that don't welcome people learning their languages because they feel that that's their language, and so in that sense belonging. So, but if you feel that that's not the case, you're entitled to disagree, and I respect that you can disagree. It's a free world where you're free to agree or disagree with different learnings and points of view. So Larry asks, what about languages that are not indigenous but might be nevertheless threatened long term? Catalan or a number of other languages like in India. Then I think that they would fall under the vulnerable and endangered languages potentially. Catalan itself, I mean, it feels like it's a thriving language, but I understand that that's just an example of what could be in the future, and I take that on board. It could well be the same for other languages, like, for example, the variations of Rätoromanche, variations of the Romani languages, variations of Sami languages, for example, the different types of Sami languages that are out there. Many of them could be indigenous, but also could be endangered or vulnerable for very different reasons. And so, yes, I think that they all deserve attention. And so there are many, many people out there who love languages, and I think hopefully we can all find something that calls out to us. And moving to different places with events and giving people the opportunity to talk on topics that are important to them, I think is very, very important. So it's how we understand what's important to different people and different peoples around the world. We all have different histories, we all have different points of view, we all have different drives and different motivations and different ways we see things. And no two people are the same from my experience. I don't think I've ever met two people, even twins, that I think are the same. We're all unique. And so our take on the world is our own take on the world. And this is why I said I'm very happy to say to Timothy, I accept and respect that he doesn't agree with me on a certain point, because that's valid and that's fine for him to do that. As long as we're open that that's not the only point of view. And I think that's the important thing. Do you plan on organizing a polyglot gathering in Turkey? I wish I could organize the polyglot gathering as well as the organizers of the polyglot gathering organize it. They do a wonderful job, and maybe they might be interested in doing something in Turkey one day, who knows. The Polyglot conference and the language event are the ones that I run. And yeah, I mean, definitely Turkey is a country that I absolutely love. Istanbul is one of my favorite cities. And so it's not out of the question that I would organize something myself there. Yeah, I'm glad that you asked the question and that there's an interest there to do that. It would be cheap and linguistically diverse thanks to minorities. Absolutely. There's a lot of diversity in Turkey, and I really appreciate the question. Who knows, in the future we could go to Turkey. Why not? And hopefully if you talk to the gathering organisers, they might also be interested in doing something there too. They always do a wonderful job. And I think that that's all for the questions. Thank you all so much for taking the time to listen to me. And I hope, as kind of a final thought for this talk, I hope that no matter what you believe, what you think, what you feel, what your experiences are, that the next time you meet somebody who's from one of these communities, that when you ask them a question, you're ready for an answer that's not what you expected. And that answer isn't a personal thing against you or your thoughts, your beliefs, your history and your lived experiences, just a different lived experience and a different story that will help you to connect to another human being made of flesh and blood, just like you, and also has a story to tell. Thank you.